We see here yet another occasion when the Pharisees and teachers of the law tried to entrap Jesus. Verse 1 tells us that these people came up to the Galilee from Jerusalem and questioned him. You don't usually get Pharisees and teachers of the law in the Galilee area. This was 50 miles from Jerusalem, and it was in Jerusalem where all the schools of learning and rabbinic academies were based. You simply didn't get Pharisees and teachers of the law in Galilee. But here they are, carefully observing Jesus and his disciples. They asked Jesus why he and his disciples didn't wash their hands before eating, as this was breaking the tradition of the elders, breaking their law. In the New Testament, the tradition of the elders, the oral law, or, as Jesus is quoted as saying many times, "You have heard it said," was a whole series of man-made rules and regulations thought up by rabbis and scholars of the law over a number of centuries. These were not actually written down until 220 AD in what is now called the Mishnah. So in Jesus' day, it was referred to as the oral law, as it had not at that time been written down. Jesus never broke the law of Moses, which was given by God, but he seemed to take delight in provoking the religious leaders by ignoring their traditions. These traditions were a tremendous burden to the people and had no significance at all to God. And the leaders themselves were really clever in how they managed to get around the law if it suited them. The observance of their rules and regulations was so important in their society that a person's spirituality was judged on how they observed the oral law. It did, in fact, become more important to them than Scripture. The Pharisees would ceremonially wash their hands 3 times from the elbows down before eating. Here are a couple of interesting quotes from the Mishnah about hand washing. Rabbi Awira says, "Whoever eats bread without previously washing his hands is as though he had relations with a harlot." Rabbi Zerika says, "Everyone who despises washing of hands sinks into poverty." There are many more quotes similar to these. How about this one? "He who eats without hand washing is as a murderer." Yep, I know what you're thinking. I thought the same. Pretty extreme. No wonder the people made sure they observed the Pharisaic law. The Pharisees would not partake in eating the smallest seed without washing their hands first. If there was no water available, they would have to walk up to 4 miles to find water to wash. Mark chapter 7 records this same story, and in verse 3 we are told, "The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and they observe many other traditions, such as washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles." We think maybe our hand washing at the moment is extreme, but it's nothing compared to the law of the Pharisees. So how did Jesus react to the accusation from the religious leaders? This was not a question, actually. It was an accusation. He called them hypocrites, and he quoted Isaiah, saying, "They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." Hypocrites? Perhaps not a smart thing to call the religious leaders, you would think. How I love Jesus, never afraid of confrontation. He said to them in response, "Why question me for breaking your tradition of hand washing, when you break the law of Moses to get out of helping your parents, when God commanded you to honour your father and mother?" You see, God had commanded that a person would have to honour his father and mother and provide for them in their old age. However, the Pharisees wanted to hold on to their own money and instituted the law of Korban, the law of dedication. This means that the individual Pharisee could say, "All I have is Korban," which means dedicated. This would enable his money to be used to benefit the temple, or he could keep it for his own use. What it could not be used for was the benefit of anyone other than him. So if his parents were in need, he would simply declare his money Korban, which by Pharisaic law meant he could use his money for his own purpose or that of the temple, but he couldn't give it to his parents. This was just one way that the Pharisees got around the law of Moses, well, actually breaking the law of Moses by their own traditions. Hypocrites indeed. The Pharisees declared that you were defiled if you ate without hand washing. But what was Jesus' take on this? Before we find that out, let's sing our next hymn, "Open the Eyes of Our Heart, Lord," followed by our reading from Matthew 15 verses 10 to 20, read by Johnny Glossop.